Many of both the political right and most recently the political left have been pondering, and I quote, "My America is being made over into a carbon copy of thousands of despotisms that have gone before." A graduate of Harvard Law School and a successful businessman, in 1957 he founded the John Birch Society. After Mr. Welch's talk, those of you who are interested in staying for questions and answers will please come towards the front, and there will be a microphone at the men's lounge side of the auditorium for questions and answers. With our guest's permission, I would also like to announce that these are one of our last 3 programs on the speakers program. This afternoon, Mr. Welch. Next Wednesday afternoon, Stokely Carmichael. Next Friday afternoon, Senator Jacob Javits. And now, it's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Robert Welch. Water down here.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Levine, and good afternoon, young ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to be talking, as you may not have been told, on the John Birch Society. I've been speaking pretty steadily for the last 2 or 3 months on the Vietnam picture, but I thought here for today, and especially for the comparatively short time for a long-winded old man like me that was allowed, I should talk on the society, because if you want to go to learn about American Legion, you'd probably go to the commander of the Legion, and if you want to learn about the society, probably I am the fellow that should try to tell you about it. So let's start at the beginning. And the John Birch Society was founded in Indianapolis on December 9, 1958. It was chartered under the general laws of Massachusetts as a non-profit educational organization. And we have lived up meticulously to those specifications, including not making any profit, for 8 years. During those 8 years, we have sought to bring into the John Birch Society only men and women of good character, humane consciences, and religious ideals. For we are striving to set an example by dedication, integrity, and purpose in word and deed, which our children's children may follow without hesitation. Members of the society are of all races, colors, and creeds. We are of all social, economic, and educational levels. We are individualists who disagree among ourselves about many things, but we are firmly united in devotion to those beliefs, principles, and purposes which we do hold in common. For we have voluntarily joined together, 1, to combat more effectively the evil forces which now threaten our freedom, our lives, our country, and our civilization. 2, to prevail upon our fellow citizens to start pulling out of the deepening morass of collectivism, and then climb up the mountain to higher levels of individual freedom and responsibility than man has ever achieved before. 3, to restore with brighter luster and deeper conviction the faith-inspired morality, the spiritual sense of values, and the ennobling aspirations on which our Western civilization has been built. The long-range objective of the society has been summarized as less government, more responsibility, and a better world. So we collided with communism. For the purposes I have just outlined to you brought us immediately into conflict with the communists on 2 levels. On the ideological plane, the communists seek always and everywhere to bring about more government, less individual responsibility, and an immoral world. And on the plane of action, until the communists can be stopped from completing their subjugation of the whole world, there will be no opportunity for us to move forward at all towards our permanent goals. We have undertaken, therefore, to play a leading role in slowing down, stopping, and eventually routing the communist conspiracy. We realize that the one thing no conspiracy can withstand is the light of day on its activities. The only danger to their gigantic conspiracy, which the communists fear, is exposure. For this reason, we do all that we can to bring to our fellow citizens more knowledge and a better understanding of the methods, the progress, and the menace of the communist machine. In this undertaking, we have become a new form of opposition to the communists, which they have never faced before in any of the vast areas they have already taken over. So the communists, grasping this fact very early, set out in 1961 to destroy us. The most official communist publication in the United States is The Worker, in which the line is laid down for the faithful. During the last 6 months of 1961, there was, we believe, only one issue of this communist weekly paper which did not contain an attack somewhere in its pages on the John Birch Society. And a number of issues contained as many as 6 or 7 separate attacks on us at that many different places. The comsimps got the point and have been carrying out the indicated program with increasing furor ever since. Now, of course, the communists follow Lenin's basic strategy of advancing communism by non-communist hands. They could never impose the tyrannical rule of some 3% of a population over the whole population, which they repeatedly do in one country after another, unless they could inveigle enough non-communists and even anti-communists among that other 97% into doing their dirty work for them, deceptively appealing, for instance, to every motivation in human character, from sordid selfishness to practical politics to misguided idealism. They have gradually beguiled a lot of very good Americans into joining the attack on us, until the maligning of the John Birch Society has now probably exceeded in intensiveness and extensiveness that faced by any other organization in all American history. And in general, our defamers do not even try to refute the facts on which we focus attention. They merely call us names for bringing these facts to light. And then we stir up the politicians. The John Birch Society itself is in no sense a political organization. We try to give our members information, understanding, and we hope even inspiration, which will make them better citizens. As good citizens, they may take, and we hope that most of them will take, an active part in politics. But each member does so entirely on his own, working in the party of his choice for the candidate of his choice, exactly as do members of the American Legion or the Knights of Columbus or the Rotary Club or a Baptist church. Let me explain that that's not only a sound policy with us as a matter of principle, but from the pragmatic point of view, it's absolutely necessary. In this 1966 election, for instance, in the state of Alabama, our members, and we are quite strong in Alabama, our members were about one half divided, one half of them, for Martin, a conservative Republican congressman for governor, and about half were for Wallace. And you can imagine, and we've had the same thing over and over in many states, and you can imagine what would happen to the John Birch Society if we tried to tell either faction, no, you're wrong, you work for the other side. So we do not take any part in politics or support or oppose any candidates in political campaigns. Our members, as I said, do. And they sometimes are almost unanimous, but they're frequently divided right down the middle. We regard education as the means and political action as only the mechanics for bringing about what we think are improvements in government. The mechanics will automatically be used when sufficient education has prepared the way. We mean it quite literally, therefore, when we say that education is our total strategy. and truth is our only weapon. Or, as made clear throughout the Blue Book and emphasized again on its last page, our gigantic task is simply to create understanding. Members of the John Birch Society, however, are extremely hardworking, highly respected in their local communities, and always earnestly determined on behalf of any cause or candidate that they support. When circumstances bring any appreciable number together behind any particular candidate, their weight is out of all proportion to their numbers, and that weight is usually felt, of course, on the side of the conservatives of either party. So the liberals of both parties naturally raise all the clamor they can against Birchers in politics. As the stranglehold of the liberals on both parties now steadily increases, even conservative politicians feel unceasing pressures to improve their images by joining the chorus of attack on the John Birch Society. Very few of them indeed have ever realized the extent to which they were running interference for the communists. A related part of the mammoth and many-faceted campaign which the communists have generated against us is a deliberate and widespread attempt to associate the John Birch Society in the public mind with the Communist Party, of all things, with the Ku Klux Klan and other so-called extremists of the left and of the right. Our approach to the problems of today is so different from the viewpoint of the clans that we have never knowingly admitted a member of any clan into the society. We estimate that about 40% of our total membership is Catholic. Many of our finest chapter leaders are Jewish, about 800 to 1,000 as near as we can tell of our members. We don't know because we do not ask anything about a man's religion in the application form, but we think about 1,000 of our members are Jewish, and they are very wonderful members with a lot of courage, because since we have been, it takes a lot of courage, but it takes even more than you realize, because since we have been under such incredible attack by the ADL, these people have formed an organization of several hundred Jewish members to defend us from the utterly untruthful charges of the ADL. Anyway, we are very proud of our small but growing number of Negro members who are working so hard and so courageously with us to show our fellow citizens, both white and colored, how the Negroes are being used today by the communists to serve communist purposes. We have no similarity or sympathy whatsoever with the clans. While the so-called American Nazi Party, according to J. Edgar Hoover, has less than 100 members, or did when I copied this down, and we think it's sometimes given immense publicity by some media for the very purpose of using it by utterly false association to discredit the John Birch Society. Now, I could go on. I'd love to take time to tell you, because I mentioned our Negro speakers and what a grand job they are doing. We have about 200 speakers on our Speakers Bureau, of whom about 50 are active, and about 8 Negro speakers, of whom about 4 are active. But we have 3 or 4 working practically full-time for us. We have one, Lola Bell Holmes, who recently completed a tour of 83 consecutive speeches on 83 consecutive nights, and audiences ranging from 200 to about 500 or 600. And when she has some heckler say, well, now, Mrs. Brown, don't tell me there's any, I mean, you know that this is a great humanitarian movement to do away with the injustices to the Negro race, and there's no communists running it. She says, young man, don't try to tell me that there aren't any communists running the civil rights movement, because for 7 years I was one of the communists that was doing it. And she can give them facts right down the line, and it's quite convincing and quite helpful. And I just wanted to point out, we have probably 100 Negro members in the John Birch Society, not more than that. We wish we had 1,000 with the same courage, or 5,000 with the same courage. Now, to go back to the main track of my speech here, and I'm sort of watching the watch to make it fit into the 45 minutes, 1:45, I was told. What have we accomplished? And I may have got ahead of myself in my notes some, I don't know. We have established a nationwide educational army. It has a fully paid field staff. This army is fighting with facts as its only weapons. And the whole Army knows that to be better informed is to be better armed. For help towards informing ourselves first and then others, we established a publishing division. It is now turning out books and pamphlets with a retail value of about $4 million per year. We also serve as very sizable distributors of the conservative books and reprints of approximately 100 other publishers, which some of you may know is all of them. There are just about 100 publishers in America, book publishers, that you can find that have anything as an office except their hats. And all of them, even the most liberal, have some books that we can use to good advantage. So that we buy from all of them, but we buy more, of course, from the more conservative publishers. And our members now operate some 350 reading rooms that sell books scattered throughout the country, most of them under the name of American Opinion Libraries. We have certainly helped to reawaken, restore, and strengthen in tens of thousands of Americans the three great basic human loyalties: loyalty to God, loyalty to country, and loyalty to family. The communists know that they simply must destroy, they've laid it out in their literature for a long time, that they must destroy all three of these foundations of our civilization. For they can never rule peacefully, that is, without constant resistance, which is all the communists ever mean by the word peace, a situation in which there is no resistance to communism. They can never rule peacefully in any place or at any time where there is loyalty to anything except to the communist state. We were the first organization in the United States to start calling widespread attention to the worldwide communist plot to discredit, demoralize, and destroy local police forces. Our members have distributed in leaflet form literally millions of our messages explaining what the communists were doing in this area and why. As a result, our Support Your Local Police drive has now won tremendous backing from patriotic citizens everywhere. We are engaged in an entirely proper and constitutional movement to bring about the impeachment of the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Now, we have never been strong enough, and we have frankly stated it in our bulletins many times, to have any chance yet to bring in a bill of particulars in Congress and actually get the House to vote for trial by the Senate. We have known that, but we've gone right ahead with our educational program. As one result of our educational efforts in support of that movement, we have awakened hundreds of thousands of our fellow citizens to the vital differences between a republic and a democracy. Many of them have come to realize the lengths, you could even call them extreme lengths, to which our founding fathers went in order to give us a republic, not a democracy, if, as Franklin said in answer to that very question, if we could keep it. And a growing number now understand how important it is to the communists to convert this republic into a democracy as rapidly as they can. And if you're further interested in the whole historical survey, I have an hour-and-a-half speech on that. I'd love to give you, young ladies and gentlemen, even though you disagree with me, I go back to Solon and trace the whole thought, both from the legal aspect, the political aspect, the philosophical aspect, right up from Solon to Earl Warren, on the differences between a republic and a democracy. And I don't know what the pamphlet sells for, but if any of you young people really want to read it, write Belmont. All you got to remember is Robert Welch, Belmont, Massachusetts. Ask for a copy, and we'll send you one. Because I think you will find it of considerable interest. The American people now for about 40 years have been misled and fooled and really brainwashed with regard to this word democracy. They have no conception of how our founding fathers felt about it at all. And they based their feeling on it from the experience of the early republic in Rome and from the days in Greece before that. To go back, through the distribution by our members of huge quantities of books and pamphlets, we have brought a sizable and increasing fraction of the American people to recognize the high degree of communist planning, influence, control, and purposes involved in the civil rights movement. Here's a case where I got ahead of my notes, but I'll just repeat it anyway. Our increasing ability to get able, informed, and patriotic Negroes to join us in this effort especially through continuous and widespread speaking engagements, has been an important part of this service to our country. We have helped mightily to offset the emotional and extravagant tendencies of the prejudiced and the poorly informed to blame communism on any one group or race or organization. The historical facts clearly reveal that the international communist conspiracy reaches through every conceivable body it can utilize in any way to promote its ends. And we have insisted from the beginning that we are fighting the communists and nobody else. The fact-finding subcommittee of the California Senate ended the 25,000-word report of its 2-year investigation of the John Birch Society with these paragraphs. This was the end of the 62 printed pages. Quote, "We believe that the reason the John Birch Society has attracted so many members is that it simply appeared to them to be the most effective, indeed the only, organization through which they could join in a national movement to learn the truth about the communist menace and then take some positive, concerted action to prevent its spread. Our investigation and study was requested by the Society, which had been publicly charged with being a secret, fascist, subversive, un-American, anti-Semitic organization. We have not found any of these accusations to be supported by the evidence." And I think that's the end of the quotation. I should point out that was after a 2-year investigation by 5 different investigators for that very purpose, full time. What we have accomplished, above all else, is to keep the John Birch Society alive and growing as a rallying point for the increasing number of informed and patriotic anti-communists. Our members have achieved this result through staggering labor and sacrifice, despite unceasing harassments and distortions of their actions and pressures amounting in many instances to serious persecution. And we intend to keep on growing, for we believe the incredibly vicious and massive attacks on the Society have been due, in any final analysis, not to our mistakes and our failures, but to our successes and our progress. So, I have here in the notes to give you some statistics about the Society, its size, its revenue, and so forth, but I don't think we would have enough time. Maybe just let me say very briefly, in case you're interested in statistics, we have about 250 people on our payroll, including a field staff of about 80, which is a big expense there. I'll do it very quickly, get right into very crassly into statistics. Our payroll is about $40,000 a week. I'm very conscious of it because I have to find the money somewhere. And our total expenses are about $5 million a year, about $100,000 a week, and that includes the cost of our films, our tapes, our film recorders, equipment for our men in the field, investment in books far enough ahead in order to get the price down that it's money that has to be raised now, even though 2 years or 3 years from now we may get it back. Altogether, it's about, as I say, about $100,000 a week. I think I said our total staff for the whole country is about 250. We have 9 offices altogether, headquarters in Belmont, Massachusetts, a branch headquarters out here in San Marino, and San Marino, California, and then we have offices in Chicago, Washington, Newport Beach. Anyway, there's 9 altogether because I counted them up yesterday, is how I know that. I want to skip ahead before I ramble any more on that to have time to cover what is, I think, somewhat more important in the notes. We tried to summarize our opposition to the communists by asking, which do you choose? And we cannot give you here the full basis for that choice, but let's put down, or let me give you a few point-by-point comparisons of the Society with its communist enemies. 1, the communists seek unlimited power for themselves over the whole human race. The John Birch Society does not want any power at all over anybody, either now or in the future. We take every precaution we can to see that long after I'm gone, as far as you can determine those things in the future, the society cannot be twisted into a power-seeking group. Agreeing with Lord Acton that power tends to corrupt, absolute power corrupts absolutely, the society seeks to make progress towards its goals only by education and persuasion. 2, the communists believe that any means may be used to attain their ends. The John Birch Society believes that improper means are never justified by even the noblest of aims, and that means are as important as ends in any worthwhile civilization. And if any of you young men and women have never thought that out, let me point out to you how clear that must be. Once you accept the principle that the end justifies the means, then morality is merely a matter of value judgments. Who's going to decide which ends are good enough and which ends are important enough to justify foul means? That's a matter of judging by individuals. So all morality is gone. And we know that. And so it's a very cardinal principle with the John Birch Society that the end never justifies improper means. Number 3, the communists always accuse their enemies, such as the John Birch Society, of exactly those crimes which the communists themselves are committing. We do not bear false witness against anybody about anything. Number 4, the communists, I'm still out of breath, as you may gather from getting here. The communists believe that words should be used to conceal thoughts, and that promises are made to be broken. The John Birch Society believes that simple truth is the very core of morality, and that when we can persuade enough people to make truth the prerequisite to all statements and the accepted guide to all action, at least half of the world's problems will rapidly disappear. Number 5, the communists operate in secrecy and darkness. We follow the preponderant custom among all American voluntary associations of not publishing the list of our members. We do it because that's customary. One of our members a couple of years ago wrote to the ADL and the ACLU and the NAACP and every national organization and said, how can we get a list of your members, nationally or locally? They all wrote back and said, of course we wouldn't give you the list. Martin Luther King's SCLC wrote back quite a letter and said no responsible organization would give out the list of their members. And yet we have been smeared to high heaven because we don't publish every day, apparently, or everywhere, the list of our members. We follow the custom in America because we didn't figure we knew everything, and that was the custom. With that single exception, ladies and gentlemen, the John Birch Society has absolutely no secrets of any kind. People come into my office, we got 10 trunk lines coming into right there in the outer office. How do you know that these lines aren't tapped? I say, we don't. What do we care? How do you know one of those girls down there is not a communist plant? I said, we don't. We hope she isn't because she could be a nuisance, but she can't do us any harm. We don't have anything. The only single thing that she could do would be get a list of our members, contrary to our policy, and publish it, and that would be an incredible job for any 1 or 2 people to do. We have, and I mean it, no secrets of any kind. Number 6, the communists seek to break down all morality, all tradition, and to destroy the whole spiritual and aesthetic sense of values which we have inherited. The society believes that a reverent continuity in human affairs is of extreme importance, and that even the most desirable change should be made cautiously in order to be sure that it constitutes improvement. Number 7, the communists believe that man is just a material combination of atoms with no other purpose than satisfaction of the desires of the physical entity thus assembled. The John Birch Society believes that a divine creator has endowed man with a purpose and an upward reach which are visibly, obviously, far superior to and frequently prompt a willing sacrifice of the desires and needs of the individual himself. Number 8, the communists, Lenin, Lunacharsky, and many other leaders openly preach and have preached for generations that man to quote Lenin exactly, men must learn to hate, unquote, and that only through spreading sufficient hatred can the communists succeed in ruling the world. The John Birch Society, ladies and gentlemen, hates nobody, but only, and we mean that, but only the evil which they do. The society believes that love for one's neighbor and goodwill towards all men should be a fundamental motivation in all human relationships. Now, we have summarized the differences between the communist program and our own in the following brief paragraph. Quote, "We must oppose secrecy with open-handedness. We must publish to the world our beliefs, our purposes, and our methods as fully as the collectivists conceal and disguise their own. We must oppose conspiracy, not with counter-conspiracy, but with exposure, justice, and education. We must oppose falsehoods with truth, blasphemy with reverence, foul means with good means, immorality and amorality with more spiritual faith and dedication, rootlessness and chaos with tradition and stability, relativity with absolutes, pragmatism with deeper purposes, hedonism with a more responsible pursuit of happiness, cruelty with compassion, and hatred with love." End of quote. The communists pretend to believe, and some of them undoubtedly do believe, that communism is the wave of the future. We believe instead that the whole world is now tired of so much strife and bestiality, treason and immorality, cruelty and confusion, blasphemy and destructiveness, bitterness and fear, doubt and despair that always go hand in hand with communism. We believe that mankind may be about ready to arise, shake off this communist tyranny and terror, and move forward again towards a more enlightened and humane existence. We are doing everything in our power, by all honorable means, to create the understanding that will produce this result. And finally, no matter what the audience, when I'm talking about the John Birch Society, and what the occasion, I always end with this paragraph. If you have what it takes in character and courage, then by all means join us now in our epic undertaking, with the added effort of more and more good people, and with God's help, when and because we have deserved it, we shall break up this immense criminal conspiracy and return a world gone crazy to sanity once again. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah. I'm sure that there are many questions. Those of you who would like to remain for the questions and answers, please come to the front so Mr. Welch can direct his attention to you. Those of you with questions, there is a microphone up towards the front here on the men's lounge side of the ballroom. We'll take a break now.
These lights are hot, and I had a job getting here, as you know. I can't, because of this light, I won't be able to see you. I can't see whether it's a girl or a man. Wouldn't it be wise to turn this light off? Do we need it?
Suppose I just identify myself.
I don't know. They probably have all the pictures or anything they want. But now, if we could turn this light off, it would surely help me. If you don't really need it anymore, let's do. That's fine. Now I can see the young man there.
Mr. Welch, I'd like to know exactly and specifically what Earl Warren has done to further the international communist conspiracy.
All right, could you all hear him? He asked what Earl Warren had done specifically and exactly to forward the international, or help the international communist conspiracy. In the first place, if you read the bulletins, the materials of the John Birch Society, you will find that we have never claimed that he has whatsoever. I'll come back to your question on that side in a minute. But we have never claimed that he has. We have given as the reason why we think Warren should be supported. You find it in our material over and over that he and the court under his direction have been punching huge, ragged holes in our Constitution and have been trying their best to convert this republic into a democracy. Now, as to what he has done to help the communist conspiracy, that's not part of our move to impeach him at all. I don't know that I'd want to try to tell you specifically because I'm not sure he has, but I can tell you this. I don't know what Warren thinks of the communists or how much he likes them or doesn't like them, but we sure do know what the communists think of Earl Warren. It's right on the records. They practically idolize him. They have come out, Dorothy Healy herself has said that the greatest day, the most important success in the history of the Communist Party in this country were some of the decisions of Warren on one particular Monday or his court. And they have done other things to show how much they idolize him. But that has not been the basis of our move to impeach him at all. Now let's have others. You asked your question. I did my best to answer it.
Yes, I'd like to know what your reaction is to the concept that an atheist can be a moral, patriotic, upstanding, whatever the rest of the adjectives that you used earlier, and whether or not you feel in the context of atheism that someone can object to the war in Vietnam who is an atheist and still be moral and still be love of humanity.
Let me, I know what you're saying, so let me cut it short by saying yes, because I think whether a man is really an atheist or not is a matter of his own definition, on which others might agree, and I certainly would not want to say that there are people who think they're atheists who could not be moral at all. We in this society do try to get people who have religious ideals, a religious background as a basis for morality. Sometimes we find that we have a member, a chapter leader, and one of the best men we've had. Turns out that he's an atheist or thinks he is. He's doing a grand job. We've never thrown anybody out of the society, but we do go out because we believe in general we will come nearer getting what we want in the way of character from people who do have religious ideals. But I think that the word atheism is, and I'm not trying to hide behind the question of definitions, I think it's a subjective matter as to what the man himself thinks is a definition. And we certainly wouldn't try to set ourselves up as an authority in that field at all.
What does the John Birch Society think we should do to improve the lot of Negroes in the United States?
Well, I really think that the lot of the Negroes in the United States was being very rapidly improved up to 1954. And that's all right. I'm not alone in it. Ebony magazine, which is certainly the leading Negro publication in America, stated a little while before that the United States had made greater progress in solving a very difficult racial problem than any other nation ever had in history. And I think it is quite true. However, let me say this, that for whatever inequities and injustices there are that should be cleaned up, got rid of, let's by all means do it, but let's don't sink a great ship because there are some splotches on the deck under the guise of cleaning up the splotches, and especially let it be done by people who don't even care about cleaning up the splotches. They merely want to use that as an excuse to sink the ship. Let me say one further thing. We try to get our members, all of our members, to adopt this principle with regard to other problems too. But we have a very good Negro member named Al Smith. He's a publisher of a weekly newspaper in a town in Ohio. And he has been for 25 years. It's a successful weekly, carries the county advertising and everything else. Al believes that there are inequities and injustices to his race that should be cleared up. But he carries in great big type, boxed on the front page of every issue of his paper, and he has now for over a year. He started this entirely on his own. In America, our first job is to stop and rout the communists. After that, all other problems, including racial problems, can be settled in peace and freedom. We think it's a pretty good approach.
Mr. Welch, you quoted the State Senate Fact-Finding Committee report, and yet also said that the improper means are never justified. Yet you failed to quote from that same report that report was highly critical of you personally, and subsequently the second report by that same committee indicated evidences of anti-Semitism and anti-Negro bias within the John Birch Society.
All right.
How come that wasn't
on the
brought to
first
attention?
one, there wasn't time or room for me to go into the whole thing. No, ladies and gentlemen, let's be a little fair about this. How in the world can you? I gave 2 paragraphs to that report and went on. As far as being critical of me in my job and position, where in the world can you find anybody that isn't? And I mean it, or any report of any kind. I am more criticized and yelled at and harassed than anybody in America, so that's to be expected. Not maybe anybody, but certainly much so. The second report, however, was quite wrong, and I know some of the things behind it. If I had an hour to talk to you, I could point out how that was misunderstood, how it got there, and who put it there. And yet, why don't you quote it all? The second report said, specifically, we still stand by everything we said in our first report. You didn't tell
If
the
I had an
audience
hour
that.
to answer you, sir, I could tear all your arguments to pieces, but I
Well,
don't have that
okay,
time
but
either.
I point out that I'm doing the best I can to give you, within the time that I can and that I have, the straight facts and our views and beliefs as well as I can condense them. All right?
I've heard that the Birch Society publishes a few pamphlets relating rock and roll music and the Beatles to the international communist
No,
conspiracy.
we never have, sir.
You-
You hear a lot of things about us that aren't true. We have never published anything whatsoever on that subject. I think we had one article in our monthly magazine, American Opinion, 2 or 3 years ago about it. I'm not sure of that. I think we did. But we've never published any book or pamphlet on it. I know some of the other anti-communist groups that have, and our stores carry some of their books and literature. But we do
then
not.
That was it then.
We
One other short thing. What is your opinion of the Illuminati? Does it exist, and where does the Birch Society stand?
Well, if you want to find that out, it's pretty hard to give you in a few minutes. We have a pamphlet called The Truth in Time, in which it's an hour-and-a-half speech put in pamphlet form. We go back to pick up the conspiracy in 1776 and May 1 and trace it through. Most Americans think the conspiracy for the communist advance began in 1917 or something, or a few of them go back behind that to the first Russian Revolution under Trotsky that failed in 1905, and some go back all the way to 1848. And of course, you can go right back very solidly to 1776 anyway, and to some of the drive under the encyclopedists before that. But we pick it up there and bring it through right up till today, till tomorrow, and with the high spots of the history. And we do think that there has been a growing in power anyway, conspiracy for all of this time, increasing its stranglehold on the groups under it, the groups it's using, and seeking to impose its rule on the whole world. It's called The Truth in Time. I'd be glad to have you write and get a free copy of it. We do believe that whether you call them Illuminati or not, whether it's been one continuous group or not, we don't know, you can't tell. But there has been a gradually coalescing control at the top of the whole worldwide conspiracy. We call them the insiders, just so as not to have to imply any history we're not sure of. All right?
Oh, I have 2 questions that are kind of
You know, my mind's a
interrelated.
little feeble after all of this. Give me one at a time, will you? I
Yes,
might not remember
yes,
the second
that's
one.
why I broke it down that way.
All right.
Um,
That's all right. Go ahead. Don't let it bother you. Let's have it. What is the first one?
Oh, first of all, since you see a communist threat in the civil rights movement, I'd like to know if you make a distinction between civil rights movements, you know, embodied in like the NAACP, and black power groups, as seen in US and SNCC and represented by Stokely Carmichael. Do you?
I think that if I had time to do a serious study, I would find distinctions and make differences, yes. But as a matter of fact, I'm only one person. I have an organization to run, and I'm still making speeches on quite a schedule, and I usually confine them to one subject. The speeches now are on Vietnam and have been for 2 or 3 months, and I'm not qualified to get into the details on this. I do tell you that we can, I think, prove to any impartial person that there are very strong communist hands and influences in the civil rights movement as a whole.
I see.
But I think that I would be able to find a lot of differences, but I'm not qualified to bring them up. Now,
All
what's your
right.
second one?
Yes, the second question. Well, in your first introductory remarks, you kind of gave the picture that the John Birch Society had a sort of individualistic bias that was against government collectivism. All right, now, if you take that and you also say that, you know, you can do something to help the Negro. It seems very strange to me because it seems that the Negro problem has to be approached through government collectivism before you can give the individual an opportunity to deal with his particular problem. So how would you reconcile
All right.
these?
Well, we don't reconcile because, frankly, we disagree with you. We think that the best thing in the world can be done for the Negro is what so many of the leading Negroes themselves are saying today, is to encourage them, help them, enable them to, as individuals, improve their education, their lot, their standing, and so forth. Just a
One
minute.
by one?
Just a minute. Let me, I'm trying to answer
All
you.
right.
But we will go this far. If there is a desire to have government step into the picture, then by all means, let's have it done by the smallest unit of government that can practically do so, either the states or the counties or down. Now, in Georgia, I mentioned 1954, and the crowd laughed. However, in Georgia, in 1954, when the school decision came, the state of Georgia was spending 50%, a little over that, on trying to bring the Negro schools up to equal or better or surpass the white ones, even though they got only 15% of the revenue from the Negroes in Georgia. And this was a matter of a state trying to do what it could to improve the educational opportunities for the Negroes. I could go on and find for you cases where counties, different bodies have. I think everything the federal government has done has been a handicap, and I have plenty of good Negro friends that think the same thing, and I mean a handicap to the Negro advance. I really do. I can't convince you of it, but I can give you my answer honestly, just the same.
Thank you.
Okay?
What I want to know, Mr. Speaker, is that how many Republicans did you support during the last election of 1966, and how many Democrats did your party support?
All right. I'll have to take the time to answer that then. I thought maybe I'd covered it so it wasn't necessary. The John Birch Society never supports any candidate in any political campaign. It cannot. You can see why. In the last election, I thought I mentioned, in the state of Georgia, state of Alabama, let's take this better, I did mention it. Our members were divided equally. If we tried to tell them which candidate to support, we'd tear the John Birch Society to pieces in 3 months' time. So we take none whatsoever. Now, our members as individuals play a very active part in politics. They sometimes pretty well agree. A lot of times they don't. They split down the middle. But they have been, so far as we can tell, about 40% Democrat and 60% Republican. And in this last campaign, they were equally divided between supporting a Democrat in Alabama and supporting a Republican. The same thing in Georgia, the same thing in many other places. So that the society cannot be put in the category to answer your question at all. The best I can tell you is we are probably about 60% Republican and 40% in membership.
How do your members or your organization feel about imposing tuition in the state of California?
Imposing
and the
what?
second?
Oh, I don't know enough about it. After all, I probably would. I have an opinion on most everything to give me a chance, but I like to get a little basis for it, and I don't know enough about that story. Apparently, what you're talking about, there's a move to put impose tuition on a state-supported institution or state-run universities like this one. I don't know. I'd have to know some of the arguments. And why stand up here and ramble? Let me try to answer things that maybe I know a little more about than some people here. Not half of you or all of you, but some. So let's skip that and let somebody else have a question now.
Finally, how do you feel about the draft?
I feel about the draft that if we really had a will to win in Washington, desire to win this war, you wouldn't even need a draft. You'd get plenty of people who want to go. Since there isn't, and they're being sent over there to fight with their hands tied behind their backs and with every kind of handicap put on them, it's a problem for the individual conscience, and far be it from me to set myself up to tell the young men of today how they should feel about the draft. All right.
You said that worthy ends can never justify unjust means.
Even improper means, I said.
Improper means. Would you apply, I assume you support the American presence in Vietnam, so would you mind applying this belief and telling us, first of all, what you think the American aim is in Vietnam, Secondly, what means you think could be used to accomplish this aim? And thirdly, whether or not you think that means such as burning villages and napalming women and children can be justified by the aims that you
Well, you asked questions that need a whole speech on Vietnam, and goodness knows I've got it. I've been making it for quite a while, 2 of them. They run an hour and a half apiece, 3 hours. So it's a little hard to discuss the whole Vietnam picture. However, let me say this. I feel very strongly, and most of our members do, that we should never have been in Vietnam at all. But we are in there now. We have been in there so involved for long enough that we don't feel that there is any honorable way out, any fair way out, even to the Vietnamese themselves, any way out at all except through victory. And this is where, of course, you are raising a question on which we might disagree. We feel that we have a very strong position with regard to Vietnam in the John Birch Society. We feel that the first thing to do is to win the war, promptly, conclusively, and completely. And that does not require what you're talking about at all. As a matter of fact, our chief of our own Air Force has stated that the war could be won overnight if there was any will to win, and they would let him. Curtis LeMay, right here, has stated that the war could be won in 3 months with no question. The war is being carried on, and I would agree with you, you'd probably agree with this, for the purpose of making it bigger and bigger and more of an obsession in the minds of the American people, with no desire and no intention of winning it, for the advantages, political advantages of being at war, and with the communist influences behind it, for the great advantages to the communists of having this war. There's nothing new about any of that in history, especially the political advantages to the administration. Having a government get its nation involved in war and keep a war going for the sake of political advantages at home is so old. And as you probably know, Shakespeare dramatized it in that speech of Henry IV to his son, who later became Henry V, Prince Hal, when he said, "Be it thy course to busy giddy minds with foreign quarrels." Well, that's an obvious advantage, but we think the advantages go deeper. We think that we should let our boys go ahead and win the war, which is the most humanitarian, most merciful thing could be done. We think you should then set up a strong anti-communist government, a truly strong one there, that could unite the anti-communist factions, preferably under the Emperor Bao Dai, because he's the one man that could, and then issue an ultimatum to Hanoi and Peking so strong that they don't even dare look in the direction of Saigon, and then bring our boys home. And this is our position, and we summarize it as victory, then peace. And we don't think, frankly, there is any other honorable way out.
Do I understand you to say then that, for instance, leveling North Vietnam would be a just means to end the war?
I don't think this is at all necessary, but if we are going to win the war, and I don't think either there's any possible need of getting into atomic bombs, I do think there is a need of going ahead and blockading Haiphong and stop the materials that are enabling the North Vietnamese to fight. As a matter of fact, they have to have a truce granted to them every once in a while in order to solve their logistic problems. They're so tough. Blockade Haiphong and stop the supply. Over 80% of it's coming from Soviet, Russian, and the European satellites, and the war would fold up in short time anyway. Let's have another question, because there's no use arguing the whole day on Vietnam.
If you're looking for morality...
loud enough for me.
If you're looking for morality and abusing human beings is immoral, then why aren't you supporting the civil rights movement?
If we're looking... just repeat that slowly, will you? I'm up here. I don't think you get it up here as well.
You're looking for a specific type of morality here in the United States, and there's so much abuse of human beings, you should be supporting the civil rights movement instead of calling it communist.
Well, I'm afraid, young man, that I may know a great deal more about the history of the civil rights movement than you do. And at least I've studied it a great deal more. I can go back and show you how, well, we have one book by Alan Stang called, it's very simple, The True History of Civil Rights. It's about 350 pages, very carefully documented history in which nobody has found any error, showing that everything being done in the civil rights movement is exactly as it was laid out by Pogany in 1928 for Stalin. Pogany, under the name John Pepper, Pogany had been a part of that horrible Bela Kun communist regime in Hungary. He had helped to conduct the death trains, the execution trains. He's the man that actually laid out the whole blueprint for the present civil rights movement, and you're trying to tell me it's humanitarian? Frankly, it's because you haven't studied the picture, young man. Yeah, we can give you booklets, and if you were really to study them, you'd find out there was anything but being humanitarian. Do you think when Percy Small a grand old Negro in Alabama who was trying to go down and tell his fellow Negroes and other white people too, every 2 or 3 times a night in the little town about the communists and the civil rights movement, and they killed him by ripping his tongue out so that there's a warning to other people not to start telling the truth about the communists and the civil rights movement. You think that's humanitarian?
If communism is immoral and there's communists behind the civil rights movement, does that mean the civil rights movement is going to hell?
Well, I don't know about what you mean by going to hell. I hope it's going to hell, if you want me to say so in one sense, in that I hope we can get some sense into it and work on the problem properly, correctly, directly, the way it should be, and not have it used as a fraud and a phony to promote communist purposes, which is what's being done now. We have nothing against civil rights. We have for civil rights for everybody, but we are certainly opposed to the use of civil rights exactly as Mao Zedong used agrarian reform in China as a slogan and a pretense to appeal to the idealistic who didn't know any better. And that's how civil rights is being used in this country. Let's have the young lady.
Yes. You said you didn't know facts about tuition, so I won't be that specific. You like talking in abstract and vague terms anyway. How can we, who do know the facts...
You know,
Excuse me.
I haven't recovered from the plains from early this morning, and this doesn't come too well. I heard you say something about religion. Talk a little louder and a little slowly. Go ahead. Let's do.
I'm a little dizzy, too. I just gave blood. Let's see. I was talking about tuition. You say you don't know the facts about tuition, but you do say in abstract terms, such as the honorable way and things like that. How can those who do want to be better armed and better educated to fight communism or whatever we want it for, how can we get that education if we can't afford it and we have to pay tuition? And you don't have to answer the question about
I don't mind answering it. I don't know of anybody anywhere that really can't get an education if they want. There is an incredible number of individuals and institutions and colleges that will help them, so much so that I can't imagine anybody not. But to show you that we at least are in accord with your general thought, we have Manning Johnson scholarships, $1,000 each. We have 2 now. We're going to have it increased to 3 or 4, which we give every summer to Negro students to go to the college of their choice. They go to any college they want, and they're picked out of those that apply with good high school records, just to be sure, because we think it might be a little harder for them to find the backing than it would for white students. And so we give 2 scholarships each year to do our little part on that, worth $1,000 each.
Your scholarships are very admirable, and I'm sure they're appreciated for the 3 or 4 people who get them. The point is there are hundreds and maybe thousands of people who want to pay for their own education.
My answer is there are thousands of other people to help do it, like us, and are doing it all the time. And I think when you get government into it, you see, what you must realize, that as long as government is all right, that's fine. But if you have 10,000 people all disagreeing and working and arguing with each other, the errors tend to cancel themselves out or to be eroded by attrition and so forth. But if you get everything petrified under government, and the government, especially one central government, is taking care of educating the youngsters and everything else, and the government should go wrong and get some completely erroneous idea they petrify as truth, there's no way you can erode that or overthrow it. This is the danger you're running. It's happened in history over and over and over. I use the witchcraft craze in Massachusetts as an illustration. The early settlers had too much common sense to have ever gone wild and started burning people or hanging people. They didn't really burn them, hanging people as witches, except when government stepped in and said, yes, this is truth, there are witches and they should be hung. Then it becomes an era of phenomenal cruelty and proportions. And this is what you face when you let everything get centralized in government, even if it's education. We think that the disadvantages are far worse than the advantages. All right, young man.
There was an article earlier this year in either Post or Life about both you and the Society, and they indicated in there that the membership in the Society has declined in recent years after reaching a peak a while ago. Well, why is that?
When did you see any such article?
I think it was in the beginning of the year.
Oh, you mean, I think probably the one in the Saturday Evening Post.
Yeah, that's what I thought it was.
Oh, well, that they were trying, the man that wrote that article, Mr. Phelan, I think, meant to be reasonably objective. He spent some months working on it and spent a whole day in our office. And he and his photographer, and we gave him every cooperation. I spent all the time he wanted. And I think on the whole he intended to be good. He blew up and over-exaggerated and overestimated the effect of a couple of resignations we'd had. We couldn't print the whole background behind them. But the Post itself was not. The Post set out to see what they could do to make it damaging to us. As you probably know, no newspaper reporter writes his own headlines. They are done by the layout people. You can find a headline 100% different from the article under it. In a magazine like the Post, the man that wrote the article, Mr. Phelan, had nothing to do with the pictures. And under the pictures, they'd really had some pretty, frankly, dirty innuendos and so forth. It made it bad. Now, on this point, the John Birch Society went through a period in 1963 for about a whole year when we didn't grow hardly at all. In fact, we stayed between 30 and 35,000 members so long that it looked like we'd never get out of that bracket. And our people, some of the executive committee began to say, well, Bob, maybe this is it. Maybe that's all there are in the United States, about 30 to 35,000 people willing to make the sacrifices and have the courage to be good members of the John Birch Society, and we should call it a halt there and shake down, do what we can with them. I said, no, not at all. I'm answering your question, whether you believe it or not. I said, not at all. I'm sure that's not right. Pretty soon after that, we took off and we doubled in 1 year, and then went on from there. Now we have been through another period. We make no bones about it. We tell right in our bulletin. We've been through another period of about a year in which our growth has been very small, and at least against what we'd like to have it. But we have still been growing. We are still stronger than ever, any way you go at it, and I mean it. But we have not gone ahead like we wanted to. I hope we would. We hope now that we will.
Did it ever decline?
What's that?
Did the membership ever decline?
No, the membership has not declined. That's right. They were just guessing in the Post. They didn't know. I will tell you something else. They said up to 95,000 members, and it's never been 95. They didn't know again. They were just guessing.
In view of the policies you support, I'm sure we've all been intrigued by your statement that no matter how noble the end, improper means are never justified. I wonder, do you consider the means that the Central Intelligence Agency has used for non-intelligence purposes through the student and labor organizations' subsidization of funds to be improper means? And if not, why not?
Well, we think that practically anything and everything the CIA has ever done was improper from practically every point of view. You'll find right in the Blue Book, you'll find in my book, The Politician, where I pointed out the CIA was the most untouchable pro-communist organization in Washington, or the second most. And you'll find where I've taken Allen Dulles and said that any man with all, incidentally, we pointed out in the summer of 1958 in print, in publication, that Castro was a communist, period. It was right there on the record. Allen Dulles, for 2 years after that, was still claiming he wasn't. And we said that anybody with all of the money and resources of the CIA that couldn't tell by the middle of 1959 that Castro was a communist had no business being given any money by the American people for any purpose. It so happens that we also, far in advance of all this, have been pointing out the way the CIA was using American money to help communize Africa. But I won't go into the details of that. It has been. So you couldn't have any less opinion or worse opinion of the CIA than I have, young man, I can tell you. Probably for different reasons or different approaches, but nevertheless, this is bad. All right?
I'm curious about the basic philosophy of your society. It's you always espouse this idea of individual freedom and the inalienable rights of the individual and free men. Yet it seems incredibly ironic to me that the same type of people who follow that line of philosophy are the first who are abhorred at any example of people exerting their freedom to demonstrate, even to burn flags or anything like this.
Well, a burning flag is quite different from just the right to demonstrate, young man. We not only do not oppose demonstrations, we certainly would support the right of people to demonstrate. It's called in the Constitution the right of free assembly, I believe. And you'll not find anywhere that we have opposed it. As a matter of fact, in this march in New York last week, I understand that members of the society got together and had quite a part in the parade. It was not a project of the society officially. We didn't do it.
Yeah, well,
but we certainly didn't oppose.
Society. I'm just talking about the people who go along with your line of thought against, anti-communism and this whole approach, your whole philosophy.
Well, I'm afraid you're being too vague for it to mean anything to me and probably to the audience. Now,
well, I think you...
If you're going to talk specifically about burning the American flag, yes, we're opposed to it.
Why?
You brought it up. Because we think that loyalty to God, country, and family is necessary in a civilization. The flag typifies, represents loyalty to our country, and we think burning it is a breaking down, a destruction of one of the loyalties that's necessary to civilization.
Aren't you imposing one of your own value judgments on
No,
the
we
rest
are
of
not.
society?
We are not at all. This is accepting the certainty, the consensus by an incredibly preponderant majority of history and of the American people. Now, if you want to bring about a civilization with no loyalties in it except to the communist state or to something else, I'm not trying to accuse you of that, but you bring about one, you've got a long few thousand years of history to overcome, young man. I think if you're going to get into the philosophy there, I'd love to argue it with you, but there isn't time here to do it right. I would like to have you read Republics and Democracies. I think you'll find some things in it you'd be interested in, this pamphlet. But you're going to get into philosophy and morality to that extent. I can't answer it here. I think I can defend the fact that there are places where you can draw a line, even though we are willing to go along with. In fact, we encourage or far all the variations in human thought within almost limitless range, as we said, because we believe that the errors, if allowed to work freely, will balance themselves out. We don't want them petrified under government into one huge error that you can't get rid of. So we wouldn't be as far apart as you think. But there are limits within any particular time and place. Let's skip it because we just go on, and I'm sorry, but all right.
Mr. Welch, references have been made to your statement that the ends do not justify any means, no matter how noble these means be. Other applications have been made to other problems. I believe you're referring to the communistic doctrine of violent revolution.
No, I wasn't referring at that point at all. I wasn't. I was referring to a general principle that the end doesn't justify the means. That's all. In fact, I wasn't even thinking about
all right,
the
that's
communists.
fine. Then, do you completely and absolutely condemn all violent revolution or revolution of any kind for ideological or economic reasons?
No, not at all. Not at all.
Then what is
As a matter of fact, if the revolution is for sound ideological purposes, I can see many times when it might be idealistic and justified. My greatest criticism of the communist revolutions is that they are not for that. That's a pretense. That's a phony. The communists at the top, and communism is always imposed from the top down, pretend that they are stirring up and leading and supporting revolutions from the bottom up. They never really make them. They get merely a semblance of them, a pretense of them, with all of their cruelties and coercion, so that they can pretend that, and then through diplomatic negotiations, as for instance at Evian, sell Algeria out to the communists, even though 95% of the people in Algeria wanted no part of it. It's perfectly clear on the record. But they get these pretenses of revolution which they use. If you're talking about an honest, idealistic revolution, certainly, that's part of the human race's climb. We object to the phoniness of the whole thing. Let's try again.
So you claim that the civil rights movement is communist-led and inspired.
Yes, we do.
Now, Martin Luther King, James Meredith, and Dick Gregory, and Stokely Carmichael are for.
Well, I don't know enough about them at all. I noticed that J. Edgar Hoover has just come out this morning's paper. I had time to read on the plane with some rather interesting remarks about Stokely Carmichael. But I don't know enough about the others, and I don't want to say anything there. I will just pick the first one because he's the best known. Martin Luther King. In our book that we published by Alan Stang, I told you it's about 350 pages of very carefully documented history. Nobody can find any errors in it. He gives two whole chapters to Martin Luther King. And the end of the chapters he says, I think he says with regard to the $64 question, if I remember correctly, but he says the rest of this anyway. So, considering the way, is King a communist? He said, considering the way that he has hired communists, been hired by communists, worked with communists, affiliated with communists, trained communists, been trained by communists, and associated by communists, whether or not he himself is a communist would seem to be a matter of concern only to his psychiatrist. And this is the way I would leave it about King. But you can give it if you want it, if you're really interested. There's 2 chapters there giving you the record.
Would you be willing to come out, though, and say that Martin Luther King or any of these...
I just told you I would stand right by what Alan Stang said in the book. It's not my job to go around making any such statements.
We have time for 2 more questions.
All right.
Could you discuss your feelings on Social Security in the United States?
Yes, I'd love to have an hour to do it. My feeling on Social Security is that there is a far better way of arriving at and accomplishing the same thing, but until you could begin to have the new way come in, Even if you could have an extreme conservative government take over tomorrow, I would not be for wiping it all out. I would be for trying to find and use the better way. The better way actually was coming in America if we could have kept government from getting into it so strong. When Henry Ford in 1912 doubled the price of labor from $2.50 to $5 a day, he wasn't being humanitarian or idealistic particularly. He was trying to find enough good labor to man his factories in the growing factory system in America. And so would other businesses have had to do the same and did begin to do the same, and we were all ready to have the most incredibly wonderful, fully funded pension plan come in America. In fact, some of the companies went ahead and had it and got it and still have. But before it could ever become the custom, so that every good business, in order to get labor, would have to do it, the government begins to step in. As the factory system in America grew so fast, the competition for labor was becoming terrific. That's why Ford did this, was going to get more terrific, even though men were coming off the farms when they could raise more food with machinery, with less people. And you would have had a time very soon when, for competition for labor, you would have had an incredibly good, fully funded pension plan, which would pay retired workers that now get Social Security a lot more than they're getting now, out of money that had been earned and saved in competitive production, and with the money worth something instead of being itself ruined in its value by these very payments, and everything about the system would have been infinitely better. So we're opposed to Social Security if you can have something better in its place, and we do think there's a better way. But you've got to be practical, and if you were going to try to get America back to where you could take the government out of this picture and let competitive enterprise do this as it has built America before, we'd be all for it, but you couldn't move it overnight. You'd have to adjust to what the circumstances are. Okay?
You mentioned the fact that opposition to your cause has made your group stronger. Now, what I'd like to know is, can we carry this line of reasoning to apply to the fact that the more opposition the Communist Party receives, the stronger it gets also?
It is certainly opposition to the communism, especially where the bosses at the top could have some of those at the bottom, the idealistic saps which they were, become martyrs, has certainly, to that extent, at times helped the cause. You can't put any such general rule on it as this. If so, you'd have it that the more they were prosecuted, automatically by that alone, the stronger they got. Incidentally, I don't remember where I said this about ourselves. I'm not saying I haven't, but I didn't say it today anywhere, and I don't know where you picked it up. I said that the pressures we'd been under made us stronger.
Right.
Well, okay, I wouldn't deny it, but I didn't remember putting it in that form. But certainly, the communists have gained by being able to think of some of their people, have them converted, being thought of as martyrs, yes.
Doesn't this undermine your whole cause?
Do what?
Doesn't this undermine?
Not necessarily, because I think that in most cases, those who became martyrs were working for very immoral, very improper, very undesirable, cruel, non-humanitarian purposes, even though they themselves were sold to believe it. You take a man like Manning Johnson. He was a great American. He was a very idealistic young man when he went in the Communist Party. In all these first few years, he thought he was working for something very noble and very altruistic, very idealistic. He finally found out that he was working for nothing but a bunch of gangsters above him at the top trying to use every pretense, every dirty trick, and every deception to increase their power. And he got out knowing that he'd get killed when he got out to try to tell the American public what he had learned in those 10 years. And he's one that did learn it, but an awful lot of them who become martyrs haven't learned it. Some more?
One more.
All right.
Something caught my attention in your speech, but we'll come to that in just a second. But first I want to ask you, what would you do, what would be the position of your society if the people of Vietnam, in what would be termed, let's say, a consensus here in this country, would choose in a free election a government favorable to Ho Chi Minh or Ho Chi Minh?
Well, in the first place, you're asking an impossible if. It's never happened yet.
What about Kerala?
If the communists had any chance of winning in a free election, they wouldn't have to have such incredible, cruel restrictions to keep people from getting out of communist countries, as they do all the time. So let's don't waste time over that one, young man.
All right, well, how come you said your society would like to see Bao Dai back in Vietnam when he was deposed in such an overwhelming referendum it couldn't even be considered a landslide?
I couldn't, you mumbled that or I'm
you said you
we'd like to see Bao Dai back. What did you say after that?
I said that he was deposed in a referendum that was so overwhelming it was considered even larger than a landslide.
He was? When?
That's right, in 1954.
1954? What kind of a referendum in 54, young man? South Vietnam hadn't even been formed. The French had run him out. They wouldn't let him back in. We took and imposed Nego Din Diem in the latter part of 54. Bio Dai signed that's how the theory by which he came to power was Bio Dai signed the document to have Nego Din Diem come represent him in South Vietnam. It was pretty well forced on him by the American State Department, but that's what happened anyway. And let me answer your question a little further. If you can get any free, open referendum in South Vietnam or election, and they don't want the Emperor Bao Dai, we certainly would say, all right, they shouldn't have him. My point was, what I believe is true, and believe can be proved to be true, is that he's the one man that still has enough support, enough following from the anti-communists, everybody in South Vietnam, that could unite the people. If I'm wrong, if that were proved to be wrong, then that's a different story. I couldn't hear you, but I was trying. Who said he didn't? Now you don't know what you're talking about, and I do. He's very, very anxious to come back, and so is Le Van Dien. They come back tomorrow. And this I do know. In fact, Le Van Dien is begging to come back, and the Emperor himself or his son Bio Long would be delighted to come back. In 1954, I don't know of any referendum that was conducted under any of the kind of conditions you're talking about, young man. I'll go look it up to see what there is there that brings it up, but I think I know that Vietnamese picture from 52 or 3 on about as well as you do, including what Lansdale did all that time, passing out all those pamphlets for the American government urging the Vietnamese not to oppose the communists, because that's what your French bosses want you to do. You get the French out of here as your bosses, and then if you don't like the communists, then you might try to oppose the communists. This is the kind of political shenanigans and chicanery and nonsense was being carried on by our State Department, and I don't believe it's even possible that they had any kind of an honest representative referendum or election at all in 1954. I'll go look up and try to see what they're supposed to have had that could be pretended to be that, but I don't believe it at all. Well, they say that it's time to quit, ladies and gentlemen, and it looks like it because we haven't got as many people here as we had when we started. Thank you for giving me a chance to answer this much the best I could. And let me just say one thing in winding up, that I can summarize what the John Birch Society is trying to do today, and I always like to summarize this, if I can, in one sentence. We are trying, by all honorable means, to save for our children and their children as much as we can of the glorious country and humane civilization which we ourselves inherited. And young ladies and gentlemen, you better study real history pretty carefully before you let anybody persuade you to help to destroy what was the nation offering the greatest individual freedom, the greatest opportunity, and the greatest chance to pursue individual human happiness that there has been in history. Thank you again very much. I'll now stop.